Bill Nowlin, October 12, 1999. Okay, then we're going.
Unless she's become a stockbroker or an investor like Jerry Rubin.
No, she's still doing it, apparently.
That's interesting.
That was what
I'll have to buy the book to find out
what the email was about. It was sent by her publicist, actually, 'cause and she clearly wanted you to, or Marion, to go listen to her with the hopes of releasing her record. But okay, what I wanted to talk about. First of all, I guess did the political series just kind of happen when you fell into the first record, or did you guys talk about doing explicitly political records?
Well, I think that I can't remember the date, but we did look it up. Wasn't it 73 or something like that?
It was, yeah. And in fact, I have that paperwork here.
We
January 73, I believe.
Yeah, so we obviously decided in mid-72. We wanted to do it, I'd say, when it was recorded. I think we knew all along that we wanted to do a series of political records because, the 70s had only just begun. Even 1970 was, I think, when Kent State and all that stuff happened, was in the spring of 1970. So this was all very much still with us.
72 was still the 60s.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we were seeing this as part of our contribution to the ongoing movement that we, were a part of and conceived ourselves as part of.
Let me backtrack then a little bit. I talked about this with Marion somewhat, but I didn't do it as much as I'd like to last time around. You were a Goldwater supporter, right? In your youth?
Yeah, both.
Well, you were right, Marion and I. But you were even still you were in college in '64, right?
Yeah.
What? And you knew Ken, who I guess it was not. Was he basically apolitical?
No, he was a strong. Well, yeah, he wasn't actively involved in anything, but he had very strong leftist family background and leanings.
Okay, I should talk to him.
His mother was active in one of the leaders, I think, of Women's Strike for Peace. That was a Communist Front organization, according to.
Oh, I knew them well. I watched.
Yeah, okay.
In their demonstrations as a teenager myself.
I'm not sure what level, but I think she was. I think that she was in the Westchester organization and maybe even the New York office in, some way.
Okay. And how did your own evolution take place at Tufts from Goldwater Republican to putting out Mountain?
Well, before I got to Tufts, I was a strong conservative.
Right.
And that predated my arrival at Tufts. That was out of high school.
Right.
And it wasn't the most popular thing to be at Tufts in particular because, a good chunk of people there. Well, it's a very liberal school.
Right.
But there were a group of people. I mean, there was a chapter of Young Americans for Freedom that was founded there, and I went to a lot of meetings and so forth. I don't know, a dozen meetings maybe over a year and a half or so. I knew that the people were kind of nerdy people, but that didn't really matter to me so much because they had the right beliefs. So I mean, just take that as it for what it was. But I got very disillusioned with his campaign, Goldwater's campaign, that is, in 1964, because I thought he didn't stand up publicly for his own principles that much, that he kind of sold them out in a way. It may represent, I think what it represents, and this is actually the first time I've articulated this, I think what it represents is that he didn't stand up for, I think he partly sacrificed himself for the party. I think he allowed himself to be portrayed as a segregationist, because he certainly was, and he didn't stand up strongly and say, no, I'm not, whereas, in fact, he personally integrated the Arizona Air National Guard in the 1940s. When he was head of it, he just declared that it was, there would be no segregation here, and his family background, he was Episcopalian, but it was a Jewish family background also there, so he had a strain in his family that came from that. His family's department stores had always hired, maybe not EEOC guidelines and so forth, but they were known for being a place where you could work, to some extent at least, regardless of background, by the standards of the day.
Yeah.
Additionally, he was also very interested in the Native American. I mean, he wasn't out there with Leonard Peltier or something, but he was an honorary member of several tribes. He was a photographer that was accomplished. He loved Native American culture, and to me, the opportunity would have been there had he chosen to take it. When he got accused of being a segregationist, saying, "No, look at these things." You know, yes, it's unfortunate what happens to black people in America, but in fact, before either blacks or whites were here are the Native Americans, and some of them are in worse condition. He could have turned the issue around and created something out of it that would have disarmed his opponents.
So you were in your conservative.
But see, I may be projecting this onto him. Maybe he just saw the Indians as quaint people and colorful characters. That
That's true. But let me. So in your conservative guise, when you held conservative beliefs, you could accept his states' rights position, which is ostensibly why he voted against the Civil Rights Act, because he simply believed it was not a federal matter.
Right.
But you could not accept this portrayal of himself as a personal segregationist or as someone without concern.
To me, I thought he let himself. He didn't. I wrote him some memos. I mean, I was this little kid, but I still wrote him some memos and said, "Listen, he probably never saw them, but somebody saw them maybe." And I said, "This is ridiculous. Why are you letting yourself be portrayed as this? You've got an issue here that you could one up them, and come back and say, not only do I care about black Americans, but you're not even talking about Native Americans." And he just could have done that. He could have, geez, I mean, who's running it? Lyndon Johnson? I mean, he could have said, "I desegregated something in 1947. When did you get around to this, Lyndon? About 18 months ago?" It would have been very easy for him to do, but he chose not to, and it must have been a deliberate choice, because I was aware of his background, that the information was out there to teenagers like me. It wasn't impossible. He just chose not to emphasize it, and he won 4 states in the South for the first time for 100 years for the Republican Party. I think he knew he didn't have a chance to win.
Of course, nothing else.
Well, Arizona, yeah. But I think he knew he didn't have a chance to win, and he sacrificed himself for the sake of the party. That's the only way I can make sense out of it. Now, I also think another issue that he should have stressed, but he's a militarist, sort of, at the same time. He did come out against the draft, and this is in 1964. This is before anybody was thinking about being drafted to go to Vietnam. And he called, that was his #1 campaign thing. The first thing he did was he called it involuntary servitude and so forth. I was wanting him to run this libertarian thing, maybe more than being a conservative Republican. And much of that ties into where I ended up just a few years later, which, to be against the draft, to be against segregation and so forth, that I didn't change, that kind of stuff. The area that I kind of changed in was this kind of an attitudinal one, for one thing. I was busy being a rebel by being a Goldwater supporter, because it was not a popular thing to be. So in that sense, attitudinally, being the minority, being the rebel, that was consistent throughout too. I just was a different kind of rebel. I was a rebel by wearing a necktie in the early 60s, and a rebel by growing my hair long and a beard in the late 60s.
But certainly, I take it you were against the Vietnam War as the 60s progressed.
As they progressed, but see, there was a stretch here from sometime in early 64. Well, sometime soon after the nomination, when I could see that he wasn't really fighting the campaign the way I wanted him to fight it. I gave up on him, and I kind of gave up on politics in a way. I went into a fairly apathetic phase for about 2 or 3 years, where really, I was kind of I was interested in political science. I was studying it. I was interested in that kind of thing, but I was not interested in becoming any more of an activist. I had been involved in political campaigns. I had an office downtown in the 1962 campaign of a guy named Curtis that ran against Kennedy for the U.S. Senate. I mean, I was out there passing out literature every day, being a street soldier and so forth. But I got turned off to it, I guess, because Goldwater wasn't standing up to his principles. if he doesn't stand up for his principles, then maybe nobody cares anymore. That was, I guess, the way I thought about it. Plus, I was growing up and going through mental changes, probably.
Right.
Too.
You went from being a Goldwater conservative to being a collectivist with Rounder and against...
Yeah, well, what sort of happened is that I graduated from college. I went to graduate school, slogged away the first year in Chicago. That was a little bit of an eye-opening experience living in the south side of Chicago. In a way, it was just really tough and different environment than I was used to in Lexington and Tufts, which is kind of like a suburban campus in a way, if you want it to be. You can treat it as an urban one, or you can treat it as a suburban one. And for me, it was more of a suburban one, I guess. We went into Cambridge and Boston a lot to see music, but theater, and so forth. But then I studied really, really hard my first year in graduate school. It was really hard at the University of Chicago. I mean, Tufts is hard school. It took me a year and a half to get used to Tufts. And then I didn't do very well the first couple of years. And then I figured out the system, and then I did tremendously the last couple of years. Ended up, I guess, technically second or third in my class. But then I had the same thing when I hit Chicago. All of a sudden, wow, this is amazing. They expect me to do all this or something.
It's supposed to be one of the toughest in the country.
Yeah, and in political science, it was it was considered to be it's certainly one of the top four, with Harvard, Yale, and Berkeley being the other three, and maybe the top one. But it was the old-fashioned school. In Berkeley, you could have got away with a lot of stuff. That Chicago was a rigorous training school, and as opposed to free thought or whatever it might have been some other places. But I hammered away at it, and I did so well that I was one of 5 people in the university that had no financial aid when I came in. It was a special award they gave, and basically they gave me financial aid for the next 3 years as the person that sort of, like the most unlikely to succeed that really triumphed, or something like that kind of award. It was set up for just that purpose. And so then I was set. I mean, there was tuition plus $4,000, I think, for as a stipend. It was a really good deal. That's all that I ever needed to live on, for sure. Though I did some babysitting work for like $1 an hour to raise a lot extra money. But then that summer of '67, I went for 10 weeks and traveled around Europe on my own, just hitchhiking around Europe. And I really saw things differently than I'd ever seen them before. It was I never went to camp as a kid except once, which is a horrendous experience. I pitched a fit and demanded to be brought home at the 2-week point out of the month, which my parents didn't do. But I didn't like it any more than the 3rd and 4th week either. I never went again, and I never, I went 7 miles away to college. It was not like, I went home to do my laundry. It was then borrowed a car. But then I was away for 10 weeks, and I was incredibly homesick at first, and had them arrange a ticket for me to come home at about the 4-week point. But then when I got a message that the ticket was ready for me to come home, by that time I was over the hump, and I didn't want to come home, and I ran out the whole thing, and then I was ready to come home after 10 weeks, but I certainly wasn't ready after 4 weeks. I was really getting into it. But part of what I did there is I went through communist countries for the first time. I hitchhiked through Yugoslavia and Bulgaria, and that was, I just had swallowed a certain degree of propaganda about communist countries, and it certainly wasn't true in Yugoslavia. I mean, I didn't have any much different feeling from any place else. It was a thrill to see the Red Star, on the customs post. But I came walking up with my backpack on, and I thought, oh, geez, what am I going to be in for now? And they just waved me through. And I said, well, wait a minute. With sign language, I said, don't you want to look at my passport? And they just said, no, go ahead. And I showed it to them again, and finally they took it like, oh, geez, and put a stamp on it and they handed it back to me. And it was like, wait a minute, this is the Iron Curtain? I mean, Yugoslavia was always different. But, so that was if I'd gone through the wall in East Berlin the first time, that would have suited my preconceptions. But this was surprising. I got a ride from somebody that got me drunk, driving up through the mountains and over the hills into Zagreb, and you know, it was just like any place else. And by the time I got to Bulgaria, yeah, that was weirder. But and then other things that happened, like I met up with another guy, and we wanted to stay at this one hotel, and they said, "Well, this is for communists only," and we thought that was sort of funny. So I said, "Well, I'm a communist," which I wasn't, but I just said it. How are they going to know what you believe in?
Yes.
And they said, no, you don't understand. I said, yeah, I'm a communist. So you said this is for communists, and I'm a communist. So do you have a room? And they said, yeah, we have a room, but it's only for certain communists. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, if you're from the Soviet Union, it's okay. If you're from Yugoslavia, it's not okay. And they had, this schism within the communist camp. Right? Certain countries were okay, and I wasn't okay. So they found a place that Patrice Lumumba School or someplace where we stayed for a few nights. And, but again, walking the streets, it wasn't like we were stopped by machine gun toting people. And I was just out on my own, hitchhiking in this country, not feeling totally oppressed the way that the previous year I'd been to Guatemala, which is supposedly a free country, but outside every single bank there were 2 to 4 guys stationed with submachine guns. And I knew they were a U.S. ally, and, it's just like there was a little bit of a contrast there. And a lot of the place I went, more in Western Europe, because I don't think graffiti was such a big feature in Bulgaria or anything, but people had painted graffiti on walls that said U.S. equals SS. This was already something about Vietnam that I hadn't really tuned into much. I mean, the first organized SDS stuff and stuff was 65, but I hadn't really tuned into that until the summer of 67. And then I had a lot of people asking me 2 questions. In Turkey, places like that, people were saying, well, what's this story about, racial stuff in the United States? It's like they didn't understand. And Turkey being such a crossroads of people from Asia, the Middle East, even African stuff in Europe, and there is a mixture of colors and looks that people have there. And, they couldn't have been that naive, but to me, they seemed like they just really didn't understand. They were trying to ask me to explain it to them, and I hadn't really thought about it, the whole kind of thing. I certainly didn't even know what was going on in Vietnam, and all these people were asking me, why are you killing all these people in Vietnam? Right. And my answer coming out of the Goldwater era was, well, you have to stop communism someplace. And so this is, it was the domino theory, that one country, would fall every so many years, and eventually they'd take over the world, which, in fact, was more or less true. Historically, that's kind of up to a point. When it fell apart. Right. You could make that argument, especially from China on, in the 40s through the middle 60s. But, I didn't get into big arguments. It just all sort of filtered into my mind, this experience of seeing these other cultures, seeing that people had never really been outside the United States much, except a little Latin American excursion in the April vacation of 67. No, in fact, I wasn't even 67, I was 68, so that was after, in fact. But it's just to see that there were these other people that lived in other parts of the world that got along fine, that you could joke with them, even if you didn't know a word of their language, the universal language of humor, that type of stuff. And Charlie Chaplin could make everybody laugh because what he does is funny, and it just kind of all came together. When I came back, I fell in with 2 very liberal activist roommates who would both come from Brandeis together.
Back in Chicago?
Back in Chicago. Those were my roommates. Right. That year. It was actually a guy I met on the road in Greece, and then we met again in Turkey. And I said I was
still spinning, aren't we? Okay, yeah.
I said I was going to the University of Chicago, and I already finished 1 year, and he said, I'm starting there this year. And I said, all right, why don't we live together? I don't have anything set up. And so he actually found a place before I got out there. And just said, it's kind of weird that it was so disorganized that I would just show up with somebody I hardly knew, and that was going to be my place. But he ended up working at Rounder for several years. A few years later, Bill Cornrich was his name, Kornrich. But in October that year was the March on Washington for the Pentagon.
67?
Yeah, October 67, I think it was the 21st, if I recall, but you can look it up. The idea was to surround the Pentagon and cause it to levitate, which a lot of people from Chicago were going down. There were busloads of people going down. We went down in the car, and I just went because it seemed like it'd be fun. Because these two roommates wanted to go. A lot of other people I knew were going, and I always liked political events. There's been a couple times that the American Nazi Party had decided they were going to have a demonstration on the Boston Common or something like that. And I just went down to see what it was like. People attack them and beat them up and rip their banners up and so forth. But it was kind of exciting to me in some way. I mean, it's hard to explain, maybe. There was the event that turned me on to politics in the first place, watching the 1952 Republican Convention on television, which might have been the first one that was significantly televised. But seeing thousands of balloons and all this confetti come down from the ceiling and all these people with goofy hats and waving banners that said, Tennessee or whatever, that all looked like exciting to me. And that from that point on, from when I was 7 till when I was 21 or so, that was my ambition in life, was to go to a national convention. That's what it was like the biggest party in the world or something. That's the way I thought. I had a windbreaker that I covered with I Like Ike buttons. I had at least 30 or 40 buttons all over the front of my windbreaker, because you could get free stickers and buttons at the party headquarters, and that was a treat, like free stuff, with colors. So it comes, I'm sure a lot of people get attracted in irrational ways like that. My parents, neither of them were active in any kind of political thing. They talked about it a little bit. I knew that they were voting Republican, and I knew by the time it got to 64 they were voting Democratic. So what I think they still stayed Republican through the Kennedy-Nixon thing. They voted for Nixon, but there was kind of already on the fence a little bit there. I just was instantly converted when we got to Washington. I mean, we just sort of arrived. I was with all these other people that looked like me. I was all kind of scraggly, long hair people and so forth, but I hadn't bought into the politics.
Did you have long hair at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, from that point, from sometime in the summer when I was traveling, I didn't cut my hair again until 74.
Okay.
But we all, I marched with the group and we circled the Pentagon, and it was kind of goofy. I mean, the thugs were there. I knew about them, and this, and then immediately fights broke out with the U.S. Marshals that were there, because they would just, after it got dark, every once in a while, a couple marshals would just go club somebody. They were, they had whatever they believed in, which was, that we were, essentially Vietnamese supporters, communists attacking the Pentagon. And they would, there'd be these little forays, kind of, and I never went through like a nonviolent pacifist phase or something. I just started throwing stuff at them. I mean, they made themselves the enemy. And I just soaked up all this stuff immediately from the movement of people around, and I was almost like instantly converted to the cause. I went to learn my draft card there, but I couldn't find it. I think I threw it away a few years earlier. But I can't remember. I burned my Social Security card or something. I mean, it was just like an instant conversion. And from that point on, I became an activist. I took a bunch of photographs there, and I came back and gave them to the Liberation News Service. A bunch of them got printed in the University of Chicago newspaper, and I just started going to demonstrations on almost a daily basis. And I got radicalized pretty quickly. I mean, SDS comes down as this very radical place, but they were too weak for me. I didn't know what they were doing behind undercover, but their meetings were incredibly dogmatic and boring. As far as I was concerned, all they were doing was talk and no action. And of course, later on, they came out with some action. And that was the group that did it. I mean, Bernardine Dorn and all them, I knew them from being at those meetings together, and Jeff Jones. stuff. They were all based in Chicago at that point.
Did you get a master's degree there? Did you?
Yeah, that was kind of like a consolation prize, because then by the next spring, by April, that was when Martin Luther King got killed.
Nice.
That happened on my way back from Mexico. Like, I almost created an international incident in Mexico. I knew that Hubert Humphrey was speaking at the United States Embassy, and it was open to American citizens could come and hear him speak at the embassy. And I was figuring, well, I'm leaving 2 days from now. I thought maybe they wouldn't be expecting it, and I could cause some major incident and get myself deported. I figured I'd probably spend a night or two in jail. And then I was really wrestling with what to do that would make the headlines back in America. But I figured I'd get a free trip home out of it also. I'd get expelled. But then that very night, Johnson resigned. I mean, announced that he wasn't running for re-election, and so it kind of took the steam out of it, let me off the hook. My feeling, I mean, many of us believed then that if we were not in jail, we weren't doing enough. That, the American troops were killing people in Vietnam, and we hadn't even done enough to fight it, that we were thrown in jail, as opposed to, whatever. I mean, there was a very strong feeling that, we ought to be doing more all the time, because people are getting killed every day in our name.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I went back there, and then King got killed. He was killed as I was on the way back, and the whole neighborhood erupted around us, and then they announced that they were going to continue on with the Poor People's March on Washington. And I basically dropped out of school and went and lived on the mall for 6 weeks in a little shanty that I helped build with some other people. Which was kind of a comical thing. Ken showed up there at one point, as I recall. I'm not so sure he did. But Bill Cornrich was there, and we shared a place with some other guy that we met there. It's kind of funny. I mean, maybe Ken wasn't really there. Ask him whether he passed through at one point or not. I mix up some of these people occasionally, but we got kind of bored there after a while. We made up a humor magazine and poked fun at the leaders of the movement for not doing enough, and it seemed like they were just sitting there, really, instead of doing anything. That the whole point was to camp out rather than actually accomplish much of anything. And we were all sitting in mud and eating peanut butter and bologna sandwiches nonstop. I mean, it was the only meal that you had round the clock, where they would come in basically limousines, some of the leaders. So it was a little, we were making fun of, what hotel they were staying at, and we printed the name of the hotel, we make a picture of us up to here in mud and stuff, and then they had a picture of the hotel as where the leaders are staying, We were really trying to stir up an egalitarian type of revolt within a revolt type of situation, but that didn't go over too big. But then eventually the park police just, came in with tear gas and got rid of the whole place. And then around that time I decided that I would write up that story for my master's thesis.
Okay.
And I kept enrolled, because I didn't want to get drafted. I kept enrolled in Chicago, but I never went back to any classes. I flew out and enrolled, talked to all these professors, and basically made it so I was going to write this paper for this professor, and I was going to do this research project for this professor. I developed my own program for credit, but none of which required classroom attendance. And then I went to go to New York to be near my girlfriend, because that was my real pursuit, which didn't work.
Okay.
And so after trying that for a year, I decided to come back here, and figured, well, I'll just go back. They kind of told me I wasn't seeming too serious after 2 years of that.
Okay.
And suggested that maybe I'd leave the program and that, just finish up, write a story about the Poor People's Campaign as a master's thesis, and they would just give me that. So that's what I did. And then I went back to Tufts, which I knew very well, and applied and got into the program there. Do some more coursework and so forth, but not too much. became a teaching assistant, and it took me actually a long time, 10 years before I really finished up my dissertation, but that's because I was doing other stuff at the same time.
Now, did you guys, without benefit of hindsight, or I mean, at the time in 1970, did you guys talk about Rounder as an explicitly political project? And I don't mean politics in the sense of political records, but just the whole program, the Beagram record. For
Yeah.
example,
I mean, we saw it as that. I mean, we saw the first records as kind of people's music in some way. I don't remember, this is not the first issue. Now, even this isn't. I don't remember when we started putting in, this is the way it first looked, like a Folkways album. With
right. You're looking at the first George Pegram album,
right.
Its first issue.
This was, in fact, this black basis was manufactured by the same company that Folkways manufactured. I asked Mo Ash, where do you get your records done? And he told me how he did it. Right. And so we used the same place out of Brooklyn. Right. And they shipped up. We shipped them. This printed stuff that I had printed locally here. Right. Shipped it down to them, and they manufactured it and sent it back. So not only did we emulate Folkways in the one sense, but in other senses as well. I'm trying to see here. Yeah, by album number 4, produced by the Rounder Collective.
Right.
Ken, Mary, and Bill. And 1972, but it was recorded in April 1971, so that was only 6 months after the launch of his first 2 records, right. Which was October 70. So, yeah, we had, by that time, already written up this statement of purpose, which, have you ever...
I've
got a copy of that at some point.
Sealed up. But
how we were a living and working collective and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember in the first lines you called yourself an anti-profit collective. I was struck by that because it wasn't a non-profit collective, it was an anti-profit collective.
Yeah, no,
giving the hyperbole. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, non-profit organizations, some of them are,
right.
I mean, they've got millions of dollars and the executives are making $500,000 a year and stuff.
Now, did you put that statement in all the records after you did it, or just the... No,
it was, well, we may not have put him in the Bluegrass record.
Yeah, I didn't...
but it wasn't a secret.
Yeah.
I think we probably only put that in some of the political records, and maybe not even all of them.
It was in the first one, but that seems to be sealed when you got here. So.
Yeah, might as well leave it that way.
Yeah. Been that way for 25 years.
Unless we need to open it. I think it wasn't like a secret, but I don't think we flaunted it too much. It was bad enough the way we looked.
Right.
Trying to go around South Carolina and get these people to record for us. I don't know what they were thinking. Actually, when I look back on it, I mean, we were naive, but what were Homer, Cheryl, Pappy Cheryl, and Snuffy Jenkins thinking when these 3 people, totally scruffy characters from the Northeast, come in? I think they were just flattered that somebody from outside the area was interested in their music.
I wondered that too.
Nobody in the area was interested in their music in particular, so maybe if we'd been, button-down people from Columbia or, even Durham, Chapel Hill, they probably would have equally been happy. I think they were just genuinely hospitable, happy that there was some real interest in their stuff, and we were going to get out a record for them, which they hadn't had a record out for years.
And you never talked politics.
But they must have talked amongst themselves a little bit. They must have said, can you believe that? That type of stuff. But I mean, they invited us to a family barbecue and things that maybe they did.
Specifically?
Oh, yeah, Happy specifically, because he was pretty well off. He wasn't so much. Nice brick house in a suburban development and stuff. I don't actually remember right now where that came from. It's almost like he was a banker or something, but I don't think so.
Did you never talk politics with people?
Well, it came up, and I think we kind of avoided the issue a little bit, because you could sense people kind of quickly. There were a couple of religious fundamentalists. You may have heard that one story about somebody trying to convert me and so forth. But by not understanding just what was going on. But in terms of real politics, you know, we certainly didn't, you know, try to talk them into joining SDS or something like that. I suspect I don't really remember that well. Maybe this is one of those things to ask when two or more of us are in the room at the same time. But I think we kind of, you know, for obvious reasons, just kind of downplayed certain things in certain environments.
But in your own mind, the record project itself was a political act.
In our own mind, these were the people.
Right.
Some of these people were the people, and this was, you know, the same kind of take on folk music that, you know, was around in the late 40s with the almanac singers and stuff like that. We were kind of predictable, I think, in that regard.
Talk about some of these specifically, since this is
These
your
weren't
first. How did this come about?
in the women's liberation rock band. Those weren't the people. Those were, you know, kids like us.
Well, right. Well, this is an overtly political record.
Right.
This is not political in context.
Right.
This is
It's not arguably political.
This is intended to be a political expression. How did this record come about? Who were these?
I'll say one thing though. Back on that same subject we were talking about. If somebody, one of these people, we would get very excited if one of these artists that we recorded, say for a bluegrass or old time music, would have a song that had a title that sounded like it could be political.
Okay.
We got excited about that. I mean, you know, Aunt Molly Jackson was pretty early on.
Well, and that was explicitly political.
That,
also, yeah.
our selection of the material was to select her political material and to leave all the ballads behind, pretty much.
But she was an explicitly political person by that time she made those recordings.
She certainly was, but she also did the other stuff too. But there was a part of her that was, I can't see one in the very early records right off, but I know that we were always looking for that. We were looking for the thing where somebody would say something about against the government, you know, or that type of thing. Either they were moonshining or something, fighting the revenuers or whatever, but that kind of stuff interested us as an expression of the people against authority.
How did Mountain Movies Day come about?
I hope you ask somebody else, because I can't.
Marion, who has vague memories. The women will know probably more than you.
Yeah, I'm very vague on it. I was thinking about that a half an hour ago when we started talking here. I'm totally vague on it. I haven't the slightest idea how it came about. If somebody told me a few things, it would probably bring back a few memories.
Now, if this thing comes off on Friday, as I said, I'm sure they're going to.
The battering ram, I don't remember the exact connection that happened, but it came. Let me see it just for a minute. I'm the one that did this record pretty much. The recording engineer was John Nagy, and somehow he told us about this group, is my recollection. Somebody did. I think it was John, who had worked on like the Joe Val record or some other record like that.
Now, it was a Boston group, right?
They're all from Ireland, but they lived in Cambridge, pretty much. And one of them lived in Boston. I think the other three lived in Cambridge or something. And they were around, they were playing some. And I think what really is the case is that John Nagy, the engineer, used to go drinking at this bar called the Plow and Stars.
Every city has a Plow and Stars.
Peter O'Malley is thanked here. He was one of the owners of the Plow at the time. And this was kind of like a house band that was there. And they did these rebel songs, which was only part of what they did. But that was the part we asked them to do, to do a record of this. And I did a lot of research into Irish rebel history. It's, in fact, the reason that Emmett is named Emmett came out of the research that I did for this album.
Now, are there notes in here about the...
Yeah, if that's not one that's over there. That album wasn't over at Rounder?
It was.
Oh, okay.
I believe it was. I'll look at it tomorrow.
Or whatever. I can open and photocopy notes if they don't exist someplace else.
Yeah,
We just put this out in CD under another name. On Easy Disc, I think we called it Irish River Songs or something like that. I don't know how well it did.
It's the same album?
The same album, yeah.
Did you reprint the original notes? Or?
Not all of them, because there's a lot of stuff in there. I went and met with IRA support groups in Boston and stuff. I did some, I wrote a sort of a history of what it's all about, trying to put the music in context and
Now, do you have any idea how? I mean, both of these then are living activists in a sense. These probably more activists than these.
These guys were at least as interested in just having a Guinness as they were in the other stuff. But that was good. I mean,
did they sell the record at
no, they didn't. They really went. Oh yeah, they sold some at the Plow.
Right. These women, do you know what they did with their record? They must have done something with their record because they were working.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how often they really performed.
Yeah.
I think they performed at events, but I don't think it wasn't like they were out on tour or anything.
Right. Oh, I would suspect more likely, again, I'll find that on Friday, that they sold it at political events and women's consciousness groups and what have you, things like that.
As far as we know, that was the first women's liberation record ever made, the first album, ahead of companies like Olivia and Redwood that came around later and actually came to us for asking us how do you run a record company, or we want to start a record company.
Did they really?
Yeah.
I remember when Olivia began.
Yeah, they did. We spent actually a fair amount of time with them, like a couple of days.
Does Olivia still exist?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, I can predict how the Peggy and Ewan would come about in a sense, but how specifically? These are.
I don't really remember that one either. Sometimes it helps for me to look. I think that they sent us a tape or something. I saw it like a thanks to or something. I don't know. See, Bruce Kaplan was involved by this time, and it may have been through him. I was friendly with the people at Topic Records, who certainly had done some stuff from them. They were always kind of looking out there. They may have seen an article about us and Sing Out and just sent us a tape. Right. That's as likely a guess as anything, but it's just a guess right now. Without product in the file, I might remember.
How'd you come to do the Geller?
I think it might have been Archie, and I think you know who I mean when I say Archie.
I know.
That made the suggestion for this one. I think through we became aware that these tapes existed, that he had made tapes, Geller, down south in the 30s, and maybe even late 20s, but I think it's just the 30s, 33 to 37. And he actually put this record out in a limited edition. As it says on the back, it was originally prepared for release on the Timely label, but jackets were never printed. And the only copies of the record, the pressing, he had discs that left his apartment, went to friends or others who'd heard about it by word of mouth. The total was about 40 discs. Because what we did at first is we bought the 960 other discs from him, and we made up stickers that we stuck. We got self-adhesive stickers and stuck them over his stickers and made up the jacket and the booklet to package with it. So we started off by using his existing pressings. We went down to Greenwich Village and interviewed him. So there's a lot of oral history here of him, and then wrote some story up about it, which I imagine I'm the one that wrote all this. And then he, I think, had already transcribed the words to the songs. I definitely don't think I did that. He was an amazing guy. He lived in a very small apartment, and it seemed like he never threw away a book. Oh, he had all these manuscripts and papers in there, and it was a filthy place, but it was like, not much bigger than two of these rooms, just normal rooms of a house, and it was just like, it's like you had to turn sideways between these towering piles of records and books that a couple times, 2 or 3 feet would fall on the ground just while you're sitting talking to him. Is it really? Yeah. I'd like to go visit.
She lives like a 20-year-old bohemian.
Yeah. This guy was like totally packed. Yeah. I mean, he had only one chair to sit on. He had no refrigerator. He had a sink that he washed food and stuff in, and he was I don't know what he was, but he lived very handsome out.
How old was he when you saw him?
He must have been 70 or something. He was born in 1898, so I could figure it out.
Okay.
He was 74. I guess. And he lived a few more years. We went back and visited a few times. But I wish that I had a video camera or something and could even, I mean, you couldn't get it all in because you'd have to have this incredibly wide-angle lens, but it was an amazing. I don't see, it's an odd thing here. I don't see any kind of thing that says thanks to Archie Green or something. And we used to be pretty good about that. But I don't see that we thank anybody.
It might not have been an Archie suggestion.
It may not have been, but I don't know. It could have come from Joe Hickerson at the library. The stuff wasn't really at the library.
Now, where's the Molly Jackson? I had thought that was the first.
That was in. We put that in another series. We put that in the 1000 series. That was 1001 was a protest record of sorts. How can a poor man stand such times and live by Blind Alfred Reed?
Okay.
But he also sang songs about women bobbing their hair. I mean, he was
right.
It wasn't just totally political. It was kind of like topical.
That was one of these things in which you had these finds that you spoke of. You get some old guy singing things that had political content.
Well, these were existing records. This was a reissue of albums.
Right? That's
yeah. Now, Anne Molly Jackson wasn't really, strictly speaking, a reissue because it was archival field recordings at the Library of Congress. It would have made more sense, looking back on it, to put it in this series.
Okay.
But it was hillbilly music, and none of these really are.
Yeah.
And so that it ended up more in that series coming out. There's some things that if you did it today, you'd probably do it differently.
And Archie was the driving force behind that.
Yes, and I think he must have been with Negro Songs of Protest also, which we did a second volume of.
Have you reissued any of these?
No, probably ought to.
That's an interesting. I think that's an
Just,
interesting one.
there wouldn't be much of a market, I don't think, but.
Well, gee.
That doesn't always stop us, does it?
No. Maybe it's doing it more so.
Now, 4005, Come All You Coal Miners is kind of interesting because you see the sticker on there says featuring many of the songs from the movie Harlan County, USA. That came after. This is like the soundtrack album, but this album came out, and then a year or two later, the movie came, and they used a lot of our songs.
I see. Well, she was working on the cheap, I suspect.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I can't remember that we even got much of anything for them.
Right.
Certainly not even $100 a song, I don't suppose. But it helped us sell records later on to be able to put that sticker on. Now, who came up with this idea?
Was it Guy?
Yeah, must have been. I think we went by Highlander on one of our trips. I remember being there only once, but stopping by Highlander and visiting Guy and Candy, and Miles Horton was still there then, but I hardly remember him.
Now, what were you doing going down there? I mean, they seem kind of obvious.
Well, it was right. It wasn't off the road. It was, not far from Knoxville.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time in that general area around Big Stone Gap, Virginia, and northern, Union Grove and northern North Carolina.
Right.
Because a lot of the regular music recording that we did was there.
Well, here's the companion to 4001. So let's what if I
sort of honor thy woman self.
Can I pull this up?
Yeah, I'm going to try to figure out what's going on here because they're probably waiting for us. And
you wanna call it out? Let's do this record and release it and call it out.
Now, this is another one. I couldn't tell you right now where it came from.
That's right here at home, though.
Yeah, it was the Arlington Street Women's Caucus. It was, what must have happened is that it was somebody that was in this choral group of, looks like roughly a dozen women, probably had our first record on moving day and approached us and said, how'd you like to put this out? And we said, yeah, sure. My recollection was that this was already out. I think Carolyn McDade seems to be the lead singer on here, and I remember her name, though I don't really remember her that much. I suspect she was the one that came to us. And Terry Dash, I remember her a little bit too. Just talked us into it, and we said,
Hold on a second.
What?
Let's see.
Okay,
Yeah,
is
we're
that
moving?
working? I don't know. I
Yeah,
just
it is.
pushed that one.
Yeah, that's the right thing.
Okay.
It's moving. We're going. Okay, we were speculating on Honor Thy Woman.
Yeah, that was kind of a dull record, musically as well. It didn't really sell that well. Nobody was really especially interested in it. There were a network of women's music stores then and women's distributors, and I guess it did okay there for a while. But it was not, it just sort of doesn't fit. It's like a church group, is what it is. The Oregon Street Church is where it comes from. It's like kind of like a Unitarian church group, and that in and of itself doesn't sound like something you would have put out. But I think we made allowances for it because there weren't that many women's music records out there now, and it was an attempt to be political and all that.
Now, I don't know what choices you make in reissuing. There'd be no market for these things in reissuing them. They're very much of their time.
Yeah.
Do you have any interest in that from a historical sense or something, in sort of this ground history or something? In reissuing things like
not that.
Yeah.
The Mountain Moving Day maybe because that was the first.
Right.
And it was, I liked some of the songs on it. I mean, it was, but this other one was just non-inspirational, really.
Now here's a record which should have, looks like it should have belonged in the 1000 series.
It could have been, except that this one
We're talking about Hard Times.
This Hard Times was an explicitly political thing. Dick Spotswood made all the selections, and I think it just came from hanging around his house and notes by Archie Green. So he may have been the one that suggested it to us in this case. Just that there were a lot of records on. Well, there weren't that many, actually, but there were enough on this theme that just the Depression, the Hard Times. The New York City Ramblers had already had their Songs of the Depression album, and this was just some of the original people doing, from a broader spectrum of music, doing a variety of songs on that theme.
Where was Spotswood living at the time?
In suburban Washington. Silver Spring, or one of those places.
Now this is real intriguing. Music from the People's Republic of China. How did this come?
Well, that's from Guy and Candy Carawan. They went to China on some kind of, trip, and they recorded. And we'd already worked on the coal mining album, so they asked us if we'd like to put it out, and we said, sure, great. As far as we know, that's the first record released in the United States from the People's Republic of China, with the exception of one that Moash put out in something like the 50s, which the U.S. Treasury Department came down on him for and made him withdraw from circulation. And he did. I mean, I guess that they were heavy enough about it that he just did. And that one wasn't out for very long. I don't even know if they have any trace of it. It's Smithsonian Folkways. It'd be interesting to see if they have the tapes, possibly. And so, we thought it was kind of brave of us to put that out even, but we also didn't really expect. I don't know, we thought the Treasury Department might say something again or whatever, but...
You probably want them to.
Yeah, in a way.
Chile Vincera, an anthology of Chilean new songs. What's the source of this? Well, it probably says it on here.
Well, there was a guy named Stu Cohen that had spent... he was a journalist, and he lived in Cambridge, and he spent a considerable amount of time in Chile. I don't know if it was as much as a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 6 months, but it was a significant period of time, and he had gotten inspired by the new song movement down there, La Canción, and had a bunch of original records. These aren't taken from the original master tapes so much as they're taken from his records in almost every case. I think by the time we have to check the dates. I think by the time we put that record out,
which is 87. I mean, that's a huge leap in time.
No, this is not really 87, though.
Oh, is that the date of that edition?
It's the date of this edition, yeah.
Okay.
We could more or less figure it out from that album and the one that followed it, maybe when it really was.
I can't tell from this either. I know when it was recorded by Guy and Candy, but that doesn't tell me when you put it out. Although you've got your list, which
well,
I've got.
Yeah, it'll be on the list. Or 09. What year did that actually come out? Yeah, we dedicate this album to the memory of Victor Jara and by extension to all Chileans who have been murdered, imprisoned, etc. So this was after the coup.
Okay.
Fairly soon after the coup, I think. He was moved to put this out as a kind of response to the overthrow of the Allende government and so forth.
How
Double album.
How do you get something like this out?
We've been meaning to put this out again for 5 years now, but we really want to find better quality tapes, and that's what's held us up.
How well?
Nobody's really working on it.
So,
I'd say, 3,000 to 5,000 copies, something like that. Fairly well.
and this one, I would assume, did better.
A little bit better, yeah.
The Chilean one.
Maybe 5,000 to 7,000 or 6,000. It was. I mean, we could put out almost anything and sell decent copies back then. There were almost no records that we put out that didn't break even. We kept the costs way down. I mean, I don't know what we spent for those first 10 records put together. Probably not much. I mean, the China record, the tapes were free. The coal mining record, most of the tapes were free. Well, those were all free. The Chilean record was free. The Gellert stuff, we bought those pressings from him at 25 cents each or 50 cents each or something, close to whatever his cost was in them. I think my recollection is 50 cents. But, it's just they didn't really cost us much of anything, and we made a lot of money on them, really, when they didn't cost much, and we were able to sell 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 copies of stuff.
Given the records, even though it's a relative handful, but you also had the Molly Jackson, and you had your identity as a collective through other records, were you getting inundated with political material of every type, not just album projects, but were people sending political tracts to the Rounder Collective and asking you to participate in this and that?
I don't recall that much of that going on. I mean, we were probably more active doing stuff than being asked to do stuff.
Okay.
You'd think you'd end up on a million mailing lists and so forth, but I don't remember being on much of any mailing list.
What was your own political activity by 74, 75, where things were dying down with the 60s?
Almost non-existent. I mean, this
the 60s
became...
were over, Nixon was resigned. And,
this became a surrogate activity.
Yeah.
It working with people's music,
right,
and having part of it be explicitly political
right,
in terms of content, but knowing that the other stuff was also political in the sense, as it still is, in working with minority cultures and music that's outside the mainstream.
When did you kind of? I mean, I know the Peter Stample story about oppressing people by not giving them jobs, and I know that by the mid '70s you probably had a dozen or 2 dozen employees, or just.
No, by 1984 we had 24 employees.
Okay, what
but that had to shrink back to 16 that year. We had gotten bloated.
You told me about that. What did you have? Let's say I don't want to include Thorogood. What do you have like? By the time you were seeing George Thorogood at the bar, how many employees did Rounder have at that point? Which would have been 77.
Maybe. Well, that would have been 76, I think.
Okay.
Maybe. And we probably had 7 or 8.
Okay.
And that might have included us. We had, the warehouse was basically a garage, kind of. One big room with 2 offices up front. Yeah, there were probably 10 or 11 of us all together.
Okay.
That worked out of there.
Were you working out of the house on Willow Street at all?
No.
Okay.
Well, we were.
Yeah.
The period I'm thinking of ended. The place I'm thinking of was after.
Okay.
There, where we rented a warehouse a few blocks away.
And that was in what year did you rent that in?
I don't know. I know we had it in '77.
Okay.
We bought the house on Willow Avenue in '74. I would say it was '76 probably that we got this warehouse. We did operate out of Willow for a couple of years until we outgrew that space.
And do you continue to live in Willow?
Yeah.
When you got the warehouse?
Yeah, I did until 19. Well, I don't know when Marion moved out first and lived with a boyfriend. I would guess that might have been 78 to 79.
And you and Ken stayed?
Yeah. And there were other people there. This guy Bill Cornridge was there for a while, and Skip Ferguson, who was a member of the Rounder Collective, was there for a while.
Really?
You can see his name on a few albums.
Did everyone who lived there become a member of the Rounder Collective?
Well, supposedly.
Okay.
Not on the album names exactly. No, we had some roommates that weren't members of the collective, but I moved out in 1980.
When did the idea of the collective as your business model, kind of go by the wayside, and how did that come about?
The reason it went by the wayside is because nobody stuck.
Okay.
Bruce Kaplan, Skip Ferguson, Bill Cornish, the only other three people I think who ever made it onto the back of an album cover.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure Bill Cornish really made it onto one, but we just got disillusioned. Our ideal, and I tend to think it was me foisting this onto Ken and Marion more than anything. The ideal was that everybody should be able to do everything, that we should really be equal, etc., and that it became frustrating to me that they didn't care enough to balance the books.
Okay.
Not that they couldn't add, I stopped in mid-sentence there, but they just showed remarkably little interest in balancing the books and the finances, and, making sure we had enough money coming in and so forth. And just ask any of the three of us. Obviously, I have more interest in that kind of thing, but it was kind of frustrating to me because I wanted them to take equal responsibility for that.
Right.
Not just because I didn't want to do it, because actually I enjoyed doing it, as opposed to not enjoying doing it. But I just thought it was proper.
Right.
You can't really build a large enterprise that way, but you can have a relatively small enterprise where everybody could do everything. And part of the reason behind it was, as I always said, what if I got run over by a bus?
Yeah.
Tomorrow, then we want the company to survive. Everybody should know everything. There shouldn't be any secrets. People shouldn't, develop a power base because I'm the only one that knows this, and this is private knowledge, and you're dependent on me now because I have the secrets to finance or whatever. There was an ideological aspect to all of this, but it was frustrating because these other people would sort of come and go. They'd be there for a year or two, even maybe, and then they'd move on to something. And part of the reason that happened is because they didn't have the shared experience of all of us. And so, it's like, hey, joke 42, that's a good one, but not as good as joke 14. That type of thing. I mean, we had this language that, even we didn't even have to say words sometimes, and you could just give a look, and we all three of us knew what we were talking about. We all had a very similar vision of what we wanted to do. And these other people were kind of trying to fit in, and they didn't quite fit in. A more determined person could. I think John Ferrant's an example of that at a later time. He wasn't totally welcomed in, but he pushed his way in enough, established his credibility in his own domain and so forth, and made it happen. But other people didn't have whatever it took.
Well, you have to want to be in the record business too. And I think some people think that sounds cool,
right,
and then decide, I don't want to be in the record business forever.
Especially if it means working 16 to 17 hours a day, and having these three people around that aren't your bosses. You're not actually even getting paid for doing this, maybe,
right,
on an hourly basis, where you could check out at 5. But we were kind of slave drivers by example.
You had the vision, and so you did it.
Yeah, it's just it's surprising that some of these people stayed on as long as they did. Bill Cornrich he was my roommate, as I mentioned. He's the guy I met out on the road, and we liked each other, and we became roommates in Chicago. Then we both went to the Poor People's Campaign together, lived in these shanties. Then we both got a place in New York City together. We were pretty tight, and then he came, he went off and did something else for a little bit, but then he came and lived with us again for a year or so. And he found that he went to Central America for a while, and then he came back, and he found himself, I may have told this story before, but he felt a lot of stress and strain. He felt something eating at him, and he felt like unsettled all the time. He thought he was developing an ulcer and so forth. And finally, he decided he was just going to have to quit Rounder because the stress was just too much. This was through summer of '74, so that's actually quite some years after us being roommates, starting in the fall of '67. I went off to Europe again to do some research for my dissertation that time, and I ended up staying and traveling around Europe for, it was really about 3 months altogether. And he stayed throughout that and kind of, well, he did all the numbers and stuff like that, but there was time, he was there during the whole beginning of the Thorogood stuff, too, but he wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't getting to him, and he felt all these ulcers and stuff, and he thought it was the work, and so he decided to quit. And then just after he decided to quit, he got a doctor's report that told him he had contracted a tapeworm.
You did tell me this. It wasn't a tape, but
it wasn't it was a parasite. It wasn't an ulcer, but clearly he knew that he wasn't enjoying the work.
Right.
And so he went off and actually lived all by himself for a few years out in the middle of Central America. And
it's only Marion leaving. I mean, when that happens, that sort of shatters the trio as well. I mean, you were a collective, but suddenly she's somewhere else. She's got to feed her and her boyfriend.
Well,
when he has to go there as well.
Yeah, I think he was fine. I don't think he needed her to feed him.
But I mean, they were a couple and they were living together. So I didn't mean that she would literally support him. But
first of all, she had broken up with Ken,
right,
and so it was probably a wise move to get away because he never let go. Really, he was always giving her a hard time for this or that, and they actually stayed in the same bed for a long period of time after breaking up, but then had separate rooms, and it was definitely more Ken and me. We would each be in our separate rooms at that point on the third floor of this house. There were 4 rooms on the third floor, and we each had a separate room, and there was usually a 4th roommate. But I guess for a while maybe there wasn't. We would have business meetings. I mean, we just never stopped working. We would all 3 of us be lying in bed with the lights out, and we'd be talking about this or that. We're going to call this company tomorrow, and what about this artist? Did you call him? Stuff like that. And Marion just finally got fed up with it. I mean, it was just round the clock.
She said to me today that she had a greater capacity than either you or Ken to check out and say that Rounder is work and it's not everything I am.
Yeah.
Was that evident even then?
Well, that's basically what it amounted to. She wanted to go read a book or something as opposed to just being around her all the time.
Yeah.
And she couldn't get to sleep because we were going, going on talking about, it's like sleep was an inconvenience because you had to stop work and go restore your body. And here we are talking about what we're going to do when we get up in the morning. And it wasn't like we got up and enjoyed breakfast. We went up and went right down to the basement and started working, and then a couple hours later we'd grab a bowl of cereal and sit there eating it while we're doing stuff. Food was just fuel as opposed to, some time that you might relax and talk about, isn't it nice being in the record business, or even things that didn't have anything to do with the record business. But it was just, it was just overwhelming amount of stuff that was going on. It is still that way. I mean, I could still go down right now. I could go sit at the computer, and there'd be enough stuff to keep me busy forever. I mean, it just you just keep pushing ahead, and we've all learned a little more to have to do other things, but she got there quicker than we did.
Do you want to go on a little longer?
Sure.
I don't want to go through.
Until they come back with the food.
I don't think I need to go through each of these.
Well, the next Peggy Seeger album is just a replay of the first one.
Quickly.
4012 is Women's Coal Mining Songs. That's just a follow-up to the other coal mining album.
Is it from the same location?
In some same general body of stuff, Appalachian coal mining songs. We've commissioned some of these songs. I mean, we actually paid to record some of these songs for the Real World String Band or whatever they're called.
Isn't Hazel's first album, in some sense, a political album?
Yeah. This is volume 2 of Negro. Captain You're So Mean 4013 is Negro Songs of Protest Volume 2. It may even say on it. Yeah, it does on the front cover.
Different notes this time, but notes from somebody other than Archie.
Does it say who?
Bruce, yeah, Bruce Conforth. Who is that?
Archive for Traditional Music at Indiana.
Right.
I don't know, just somebody that was doing some further research into Gellert and came up with more tapes. What?
I can't.
Oh, then we come up with Fred Small, who is a local singer-songwriter from around Boston, and who talked us into doing a record of socially conscious record. He was a former attorney that decided to become a folk singer.
Yeah, he's still doing it.
Yeah, well, he is, yeah. But he's...
about it on this record.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. She's, as you, I guess, you're obviously more familiar than you want to be with him. He's, geez, I don't want to say anything,
It's not, it's a more polished,
yeah.
It's not Women's Coal Mining songs. Let's put it back on.
It is back on.
Oh, okay.
Then Songs for Peace was a German album. I don't know, I guess they approached us directly or something. And that it had, this variety of people, including Pete Seeger and Tom Paxton and Eric Bogle and so forth. It may have come through Guy and Candy Carawan that made the connection. By this time, of course, the guy may well have known about us, the German guy.
Right.
So, we put that one out.
Let me ask you something outside the scope of what these are quickly.
Yeah.
You got, there's relatively few of these, and you do put other albums, I think, that have political content in other places. You just released an album. It's another album I don't particularly like terribly much, but it's by this guy Stefan Smith,
Yeah.
which is a very political album, but you put it in the 3000 series. What's the rationale?
Well, there...
Just that he seems like a contemporary singer-songwriter.
Yeah, the idea there was to put him in the contemporary singer-songwriter area.
And that's marketing, because it's no different from Fred Small stuff.
Rather than consigning him to the ghetto of the 4000 series,
Right, okay.
The 3000 was meant to be people that were more commercial, that didn't fit into any other series in a way.
Right.
It's kind of a hodgepodge series.
Sure.
4016 is a local Greenpeace activist type of group. They were deep into the recycling movement and just basically wrote a bunch of songs about recycling and so forth, which we got talked into as being a good thing. It's actually not, especially.
What did you sell of this? I can't imagine.
Maybe a couple thousand copies, actually. We probably even made money on that. But it isn't one of those records we were especially proud of. There wasn't anything necessarily wrong with it, but it kind of fits that Honor Thy Women's Self album idea, something that somebody convinced us at a certain time was, a useful, socially useful record or something. I don't know, that nobody else was going to put out.
No. More singer-songwriters.
Now, we had already done a couple of albums with John McCutcheon by this time, when he came to us with this idea of a more topical songs album of him and Cy. That was his worst-selling record.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it just never really worked that well. They went out on a tour and did really well on a tour, and just somehow, I don't know, it never clicked for some reason. Not quite sure why, but maybe because it was in the wrong series. I don't know. Not anybody in the real world knows
no one knows
about that. But, I don't know. Maybe by the time it came out, people thought those weren't the times anymore or something.
Right. Was this a real date? Do you know? 86, or is that
Yeah,
just this edition?
that's a real date.
Yeah, 86.
I can remember.
I can't imagine that too many people caring. It's the height of yuppie dump.
Yeah,
Reagan was
yeah.
president.
There's another Fred Small album. Look at that cover. Jeez. Him as a runner or something. And that was before Marion got into running. Or just about that time, maybe.
Yeah, this is Radio Freedom
Now,
Voice of the African.
did I tell you about this album much before?
No, not at all.
Okay, this has a real interesting story connected with it. It's probably told in the notes.
2019.
I think I just kind of wrote it out in the notes, but when we first started, before we first started Rounder, Ken and Marion were living in Worcester, and they wrote an occasional column for a weekly It was like kind of like the Boston Phoenix or the Austin Chronicle. It was a local Worcester area paper that covered the arts, and they did some record reviews for it. And the guy that was the publisher, Bob Denton, I think I don't know how he did this, but for some reason he spent like a semester or a year in South Africa teaching photography. Maybe he'd already folded the publication by that point. It was called Perspectives, as I recall it now. But anyhow, at one point, I knew him a little bit. And at one point, I guess he knew of my interest in political music and politics. At one point, I got this cassette in the mail from him, marked Beatles songs. And I thought that was kind of weird. And so I put it on, and I can't remember if he sent me a separate letter and told me to listen carefully to this tape or what it was, but maybe he even said it on the beginning of the tape. But he basically recorded some of these broadcasts that were beamed into South Africa from Zambia, actually. It was the underground radio station of the African National Congress. If you were caught listening to this station, you could get a 5-year prison term in South Africa. Just listening to the stations. And they actually did confiscate radios from people. I don't think anybody really much went to jail for listening to a radio station, but you could have. And he was, nervous about his position there. He was teaching at a university, and it was an integrated class somehow. So he was in this sort of different environment from most people. But it was just a fascinating tape that he sent. This is not that tape, but
then you went back.
What happened is I went to visit Zambia and hooked up with I talked to the people in Boston that represented the ANC. I met with them a couple times. I went down to New York and met with the ANC mission to the United Nations. So it was kind of, and I did exchange some telexes with the office in Zambia, that government in exile, and the Minister of Information, and the Minister of Culture. And so it was kind of set up for us to go there, but I went with a friend of mine, and we spent a week visiting. Saw their compound, which had just been attacked about 3 months earlier by South African paratroopers who kind of wrecked the whole place and killed some people and so forth. So it was a little frightening, not knowing what we were getting into. But we rounded up some tapes, and they had a place that was several miles out of town, a little villa, kind of pretty wrecked up, place. And it wasn't a fancy place, but it had a couple of mango trees in the yard and stuff, and they had one room was set up as just with a bunch of tapes and some very inexpensive tape recorders, and they basically made tape copies for us. We listened through to a week's worth of broadcasts, and ended up I brought back 7 reels of tape copies. I brought blank tape down so it wouldn't cost them anything, and they just ran the copies off for us. And then I edited them after we got back here. What I liked about it was the mix of popular music and propaganda. And it's fascinating to listen to it. The record, we put that out on CD.
How well that's it?
As a document.
As a vinyl?
Not very well. But again, probably 2,000 to 4,000 copies.
By the mid-'80s, you were selling your records. I mean, you were a real company selling records for other companies. Could you do anything with things like this? Did you try in terms of promotion?
I don't know. One of those tracks was used in a movie called Malcolm X that Spike Lee did. So I think we got
that was years later.
Some thousands of dollars for that. Yeah, it was 10 years later, maybe. Well, some years later. Another track was used in something else too. But there's some drama in here. They staged skits and they talk through things, and the songs sometimes were folk tunes that had explicitly political lyrics to them, and then some of it was just pop music. They'd play a Miriam Makeba track, or they'd play a Huma Sekela track, or something. It was an interesting combination of reaching people through music and conveying messages, and having very explicit propaganda, about it's time to take up the gun, and that kind of stuff. Learn how to make bombs. Interesting thing. That album of Nicaragua, whatever it says, Presente.
Presente.
John McCutcheon and I went to Nicaragua, and he was there, I think, maybe a week before me or something, and lined up some stuff and basically recorded a bunch of people. A combination of love songs and revolutionary stuff. So it meant to be a general music. It was, at the time, it was against the law to trade with Nicaragua, so we actually broke the law by giving them some money and so forth. And we thought that the U.S. Treasury Department might confiscate these records when we put it out, but we thought that would be kind of neat if they did, as we kind of alluded to before.
Go.
Okay. 4022 also happened on that trip to Nicaragua. This is a reissue of an album that was put out by a record company in Nicaragua called Enegrac, kind of a state record company called Guitarra Armada. And it is one of the most significant examples of the use of art in revolutionary activity. That's what I liked about it. It was, the story is probably told in here, but basically, in a nutshell, the way I thought of it was that there were the Sandinistas fighting in the mountains. They were often trying to convert people that were illiterate to their cause and to instruct them in certain things. These songs tell you, some of them are just like Comandante Carlos Fonseca, where it just talks about his great Comandante who gave his life or whatever. But other ones are like Carabina M1, the M1 carbine. And it tells you how to disassemble and clean the parts of the rifle and put it back together again, all set to folk tunes that Nicaraguan people would know. And so it became easy for them to learn, and they could just have this little thing in their mind. There's another album like this that came out in Mali, a couple of albums that came out in Mali, where they taught public sanitation and nutrition stuff, you know, about the importance of washing your vegetables before you eat them and stuff like that, all to sort of songs. I just think that's a great thing to do here. It was a very military type of thing. It was a real document of the Nicaraguan Sandinista revolution. 4023.
This one or that one? The one we just
That's
talked
what I
about.
was just talking about.
Yeah, Guitarra Armada. And that's, did you say the number? What did we?
Well, 4022.
Okay, I just want to get it straight on that.
4023 is called Forces Favorites. It's 11 songs by South Africans supporting the End Conscription campaign. This is the anti-draft movement of South Africa. And of course, they were drafting military to fight for apartheid. That's what they're talking about, not going to fight in Kosovo or, I mean, yeah, well, that wouldn't be happening back then. But and this was a combination of black and white musicians, but mainly white musicians here that were writing these songs. It's essentially, you know, well, from the white population singing songs as an anti-draft movement. A lot of the people ended up getting arrested and so forth, but this was actually put out by a South African company.
You licensed it from them?
Yes, the same company that put out the next record, 4024, which is by Mzwaki Mbuli, which this record is actually was banned in South Africa. I'm not sure whether that one. I think that one was
You
also.
stickered it was banned in South Africa.
Yeah, it's like one of those things banned in Boston.
Right.
This guy's in jail now for. He claims it was trumped up charges. I'm not so sure, but I wasn't there to know. I think it was like robbing a corner grocery store or something like that. You know.
He remains in jail.
He just recently. Well, he just recently has been put in jail in the last few months.
Oh, I see.
He's been in and out quite a bit, but he's basically a revolutionary poet that really good poet, good music even, which is a little rare sometimes to have that combination.
Have you reissued this?
Yeah, it's on CD.
Okay.
It may have even at the time been on CD. I can't remember. No, I think it came a little bit later.
Okay.
I saw him actually perform when we were there, Leon and I, shortly after Mandela got out of jail. We were at his first Welcome Home concert that was put on by a number of bands, and he was one of the leading singers there.
And again, this is something you licensed?
Yeah, yeah, he's a real people's poet in South Africa.
Now, are there others that you've done that are not in this group we've discussed?
I don't. It's in my mind. There's one other album, but later number. We just have to look tomorrow, and we could figure that out.
Yeah, do you want to
Looking at the catalog.
Let me turn this off.
Yeah.
I'm going to fast forward the tape and end this side.